draft physics video. Yay. Sorry. Yeah, I really want to get to more of these. And lots of comments. And as I sort of have attempted to point out, it's the underlying presumptions and assumptions built into these theories. You know, that is the thing I'm arguing with, and that these conclusions have been drawn about how it functions, their model, their mathematical model, and then that model requires them to come up with some sort of mechanism, like a Huygens. And all of those are things never seen, never proven, never established to be true, and yet they're so secure in them that these people will keep arguing as if that is well established by volumes of evidence, like a ferrimon or fermion. They even call it a oh darn, they have a field name for it. the ferrosphere, the ferrosphere. Anyway, you know, there's two kinds of particles, you know, the boson and the fermions. And what they're really saying is there's the forces, the tons, and the matter, the electrons, protons. And they're just giving different electrons, ones in different states, different names. And that's where I found out, you know, that they're calling holes in the vacuations in arrangement. So you have things arranged and you take one out and there's a place left behind, and the forces between them now are different. And they call those holes particles. And very assertively, as if this is an accurate and adequate definition. And in my opinion, it's, you know, on its face incorrect when you know the truth, that it's not a particle, it's a vacancy in a force dynamic or something like that. Well, anyway, so this is, I argue, well illustrated in the double slit experiment, in the sense you have the simplest experiment and yet you have this different variations of very convoluted math to describe what looks like a very simple cause and effect circumstance. The probabilities are very simple. So they're coming up with math, a formula, to describe a simple result, and yet their formula has to be incredibly complicated. And on top of that, because there is some nuance in the result, it ends up getting more and more complicated to have catches for those nuances. And that, but all that's ignored. I point out how it's not being taught accurately at all. I mean, gross inaccuracies being used in describing the experiment and the results. And they just keep saying somehow I'm the villain and that I've trespassed against some proven fact. And that's just nonsense. So, you know, sorry for the long preface, but what's being argued has to be understood first. The general argument is that much of physics is founded on theory that has been too prematurely established as fact, and that almost no one knows exactly why it's believed. So there's lots of, I'm saying, the sub-theories, like the Huygens, for example, are the, why do they call it that? Why do they say it's a neutrino? Where's their evidence of neutrinos? We don't get to see the evidence of a neutrino, which again may be just a hole. Yeah, not a thing. An absence of a thing. I know. Well, anyway. Yes, and so we're so far removed from it. So, and the other part of it is especially the mindless marble guys keep saying he's got evidence or proof or demonstrations, and they're not there as what he's describing them as. I'm not saying he hasn't linked to crap. I'm saying what he says the crap proves isn't proven by the crap. That's the argument. And of course, he can't even understand that correctly and says that somehow I'm denying that he linked to crap. No, you did link to crap, but it's not what you say it is. It's clearly not clear, and it's got lots of detail in it. I mean, the math he linked to is, you know, you have to scroll quite a while to go through it all. And it has lots of catches in it where, well, we used this approximation here, and, well, we made this all equal to 1 because that simplifies it, or some other kind of, and all of that matters. And he just glosses over all of those little details. And yes, I'm not a mathematician, so for me to analyze the math is going to take some work as long as they don't put any real numbers ever in the math. So again, I can only say that if it's such great math, why don't they actually do it with real numbers once in a while? Yeah, no, sorry, we don't get that. And some other guy linked to his formula, and yes, as predicted, it doesn't describe the actual experiment. So yeah, that's, you know, you can't claim you did it when you didn't describe what really happens. That's not. I'm not saying you didn't do some good math, but it's not relevant in the sense that it doesn't accurately describe the circumstance, which is detailed and complex in some respects, even though it's a simple experiment. Because what happens to let's say the single slit experiment. As you make the slit smaller, the pattern widens. But the other catch is, as you make it wider, the pattern narrows. And explain that through Huygens. The infinite number of wavelets and the why does Huygens start to fail? You know, where the dot becomes just a dot. And there's no explanation for that, and certainly no explanation for. There's nothing in the math. If I put in numbers of a certain size, the math won't figure out that the pattern has to contract. So it's another thing missing from the math. So you can make the math fail by just using slit widths that will create a pattern that is starting to contract. Because it won't contract. It'll just keep thinking it's expanding. But anyway, that's so I'm just saying these are the details. And you know, you can go through an awful lot of this minutia. But I think I have the concession that should be made is that I have demonstrated gross inaccuracies in how professors are teaching this subject. Just gross distortions and misrepresentations of the actual physical experiment and what it actually physically produces. That's evidence of reason to be suspicious. It is. I've demonstrated it, and you should concede that's not good. And then the fact that that math doesn't work and mindless marble guys has to link to some other math that's done right, under the right rules, yet none of the physics teachers at all the highest, most regarded physics institutions aren't teaching that math, the right math. Isn't that another reason to be a little suspicious? They're teaching the wrong math in the physics? Why would they do that? Why are they doing it wrong? Why are they teaching it wrong? And no, that's not reason for any kind of suspicion about what physics says, what its assumptions are. Alright, so another problem here is, as I pointed out, and as I don't mean to be patronizing, but for people who don't know, we can't see photons. We can't see electrons. We can't even see a proton. And that's the fact. We can't see atoms in the sense of see them directly. We have to use something that synthesizes what we think they are based on the environment they create. So that's like, say this monitor you're watching this video on has a certain size. Well, if I put it far enough away, you can't see it. The whole monitor disappears. Certainly all the pixels inside the monitor now disappear. Well, let's say the monitor was 1,000 times bigger. They can't see that monitor. And we're really talking about what are the little pixels doing. So obviously we can't see any of these things. We can only try to accurately model their behavior and explain what happens. Now, yet this Marbles guy will just keep saying he has evidence that they saw a photon. They saw it waving. They saw this. They saw that. They didn't do any of that. They didn't directly do any of that. They made a simulation, like a simulation of a black hole, and showed a simulation and took photographs inside of a blender to show us starlight getting diffracted by gravity. There, it's proven. We simulated it, therefore it happened. That's how bad that is. And he keeps haranguing me with this crap science, because the title in the stupid science journal or Science Fun magazine says something stupid like, we saw a photon, when no, you didn't. That didn't happen. No evidence of that whatsoever. So again, then I've pointed out things with LIGO and the fact that, where was this theory introduced? I haven't found a physics guy talking about it. Now maybe Susskind does it in one of his obtuse lectures, but I haven't seen somebody talking about converting matter into bent space, or the more interesting vice versa. I haven't seen anybody do that. So when did that become possible? I haven't had an answer to that question yet. And that's just a simple theoretical premise question. That's not even getting to the fact that they claim they can, hear a pin drop on, in some galaxy 4 zillion light years away, which they can't do. All right. So I'll read some of these crappy comments, and and like I said, there's so many subjects here, and yes, you can knock something down, one little sledgehammer blow, and you can make a big giant mess in the crystal vase store. But that doesn't demonstrate that you've got a good argument. This tearing things down with 9 million hammer blows to 9 million different locations that I'm supposed to defend. Well, that's just bullshit. And especially in this circumstance where you won't concede the obvious, which is, there's enough flaw in how physics is being done to say it's time for a reboot, because there's an awful lot of dirt in there. There's a lot of assumptions that are based on, one guy said, well, what if, and everybody said, yeah, okay, let's go with that. And that's it. There's no big pile of evidence that this thing exists. It's just that everybody just jumped on board. And now they make it work by creating synthetic things like dark matter. So again, you're going all the way back to Einstein's bent space, bending light. It's never been proven. It's just been assumed based on really bad circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence you have to fix with dark matter to make rational. And again, they'll just keep persistently defending this as good science. All right. So, mindless. About your electron-electron explanation, that gives you the inverse law, not the inverse square law. Yeah, so, I've sort of been over this thing of particles and the fact that, as I just explained, the difference between a big screen and what the screen is doing and what the little bits, what the little pixels are doing, are not the same thing. A collective does something different than the non-collective, you could argue. And so if you stayed within certain boundaries of distance of a screen, and you just put your finger like this with a hole, and the light comes through, it doesn't matter how far away you make the hole, you'll get, well, you won't get the same amount of light. That's not the, that's not what I want to say at all. It's this whole infinite plane argument versus a non-infinite plane. Well, anyway, I'll get to his exact accusation. If I have two electrons and have the distance, the occurrence of interaction will be twice as much. So there will be twice as much force. Right. So, as I've argued, the electrons don't care about distance in the sense that the same amount of stuff will be trapped between two things. So the ping pong ball, if I have a ping pong ball bouncing between my fingers, it doesn't matter how far apart I put them, the ping pong ball will still hit. It'll still be just one ping pong ball. But as I bring them closer, it'll hit more often because it'll go back and forth in that smaller location. So there'll be more impacts, more pressure, so to speak. And yes, that's not a square of the distance. It's just I double the distance, I have the force. So the inverse square law means I double the distance and the force is 1/4. So gravity works that way. But that has to do with gravity being produced over a round sphere, and as it's affecting the other stuff. So it has directionality issues. What's a better way to put it? As you get closer, the shadow gets bigger. Where between an electron and electron, there's no real shadow. There's just stuff bouncing back and forth, and it's a certain amount of stuff. And that size doesn't matter. So the further away you go, it just doesn't matter. Size doesn't change. Okay. Relative to the force when you get into the microscopic. Alright, so he says, so not only do you fail to produce, puts lines through that, deny any non-trivial phenomenon in electrodynamics, you fail to produce Coulomb's law. Alright, so he makes this bold assertion. Now first, Coulomb's law deals with surface charges. Surface charges are, by comparison to the size of an electron, they're an infinite plane. Okay, so that's the catch there. It's the same. Let's see how to put this one. It's obviously Coulomb's law doesn't describe individual electron interactions. It describes charge on surfaces. And charge on surfaces is coming out at all kinds of different angles, and where the electron and electron isn't. So there's no incompatibility. The argument would be as soon as you put 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 electrons together and then 6 on the other side, you'll duplicate Coulomb's law, because now you'll have interactions at all of those. Each of the 6 electrons here will have a relationship to all 6 of the bottom electrons, and vice versa. And so that's when the effect gets squared. Because now you can, as you move away, you change the angle, which means you no longer have interactions, and you increase interactions as you get closer because there's more stuff in the angular. As you get closer, the shadow gets darker. So he's just basically ignoring what I have said and forcing me to now repeat it again. So anyway, you talk of electrons and protons that is insufficient. All right, that's just his claim. And I said, this is quoting me, everything leaks out, but the fact that the field energy is still coming in from all directions, so some energy actually comes in perpendicular to the protons and leaves going this way and hits the electron. So I was actually showing the diagram. And then he quotes me again. They are able to get certain distance from each other and no closer. So I was just arguing that I don't even see why this is significant, but let's just, this isn't even an important detail. How close a proton and electron can get. The fact that they're incompatible in the sense that they contain two different kinds of material, in my opinion, means they won't ever fuse. Even if they could, they would just roll on each other's surfaces. But regardless, somehow this is important to him. Alright, so he says, right. And that still follows the square inverse law. So Einstein's theorem still applies, dumbass buddy. So again, it doesn't apply with the individual charges, is my argument. And the math is never done on individual charges. The inverse part only shows up, the 4 times effect only shows up when your size changes, because the amount of force you're affecting creates a cone, and the cone, as you have more distance, misses you. So when that's possible is when you have the inverse square byproduct. Alright, since one thing is a proton and the other thing is an electron, you can't have anything trapped. Well, as stated, trap just means that there's now opportunity for a reflection. So yes, you won't have a persistent reflection. That is, the ping pong ball doesn't keep bouncing back and forth. It goes in and pops out perpendicularly. So it leaks out, as I use the term. It leaks into the middle ground, bounces off the electron, and go back to bounce off the proton and go away completely, assuming you don't introduce complications. At best, you can have a black arrow bounce off a proton into the middle ground, bounce off an electron and then go back and bounce off the proton. Again, the same thing won't bounce off both an electron and a proton. They're all, an absorption is the same as a reflection in the sense of the force. The difference is which way the illusion is that there's more force with the reflection. But the point is when something hits and gets absorbed, so to speak, and pushes it forward, alright, that action isn't any different than the reflection, where the thing bounces back and this goes forward. They seem different, but there's obviously the same conservation laws are involved. So let's see how to explain that. Yes, okay, so the difference is one thing sends the thing back, the other thing sends the thing this way. So it goes, the thing gets pushed forward and it releases something going this way, this way, this way, or this way. Something on the perpendicular to the direction of the movement. And so instead of releasing it back where it came from, it releases it perpendicular. So it seems different, but it's the same amount of force. It's just the force has a different effect. So again, it's the trapping argument that says, okay, that's the pressure that between electrons. And alright, well, let me just read this last paragraph here. Therefore, the number of interactions depends on how much stuff bounces off of the proton and shadows. But that gives you the square inverse law. I don't know what that is. Which is proportional to distances. Whether you have 1 over r or 1 over r squared, they're both proportional. So one just means that twice the distance is half the force, and one means twice the distance is 1/4 the force. So you still fail to counter that argument. I don't have an argument to counter. You're misapplying Ohm's law. So I don't think that would work because the repulsive force will only be stronger proportionally to the inward force. Alright, so I guess I'll go to the drawing one more time. It's probably just redundant though. So anyway, this is the basic idea between a proton and an electron. Is force, black force hits the red thing, comes out perpendicular. Red force hits the black thing, goes out perpendicular. The black stuff reflects, the red stuff reflects off of this. The point is as they get closer, there's still force that, say, a black comes in this way, it will be bent this way, which means it will hit the electron and reflect, come back into the proton, and leave going this way. So it won't keep bouncing, but it will produce some force going this way from the field. Now, the amount of that force in proportion to the energy of this force is the part that gets a little complicated, because you could say it would all be equal and they'd all just stay where they are and there'd be no attractive force. But what you have to always understand is this electron, as I pointed out, doesn't care how far away other electrons are. It's always bouncing back and forth between them. So there's always an electron force. That's the field. See, they create fields to simulate the pressure that these entities create against each other. And so the more electrons, the higher the voltage, so to speak. Well, the voltage is another way of saying pressure. That's more pressure. And you never have zero pressure. Even if I take an electron here and I take one and put it 1 billion light years away, there's still added pressure because the photons, so to speak, the gravitons, the tons that are bouncing between, the ping pong balls that are bouncing between those two electrons, are in fact going to come back. They're going to be more energy in the sense it's going to reflect and come right back. So it has double the strength of something that doesn't come back, quite obviously. So there's always, all the electrons create force against all the other electrons, and all the protons create force against all the other protons. So if I take from another universe and I dump a bunch of electrons into this universe, I'll increase the voltage of the universe. I'll increase the pressure between the electrons. And that pressure will likely increase the pressure between the external pressure, likely to move electrons towards protons. Alright, so this very low pressure might be stated too soon. I mean, because it's not as, I have to explain how it's as strong as the repulsive force is easy to understand. That's the reflection. So that's the ping pong balls as they get closer. The fact that all this force leaks out is also sort of easy to understand, but you have to understand it in the context that if an electron is next to another electron, and this electron is next to another electron, that's when now the perpendicular energy is less effective. Less of it can get to the electron. But it's clearly something I have to draw diagrams of, because you have to recognize that now stuff coming this way into this, say if I put another electron here, stuff coming in this way ends up bending this way. And then that ends up bending that way, getting to the proton. So there's lots of U-turns possible. Lots of different ways for the energy to migrate. But the simple mechanism, I think, is still solid in the sense that just having these opposite polarizations and having the two effects, the effect of perpendicular release, which has been demonstrated in ways that is just obvious to see in terms of the electromagnetic relationship the fact that EMF transmits magnetism and electricity in this perpendicular manner. That's been demonstrated. So it fits what we see in the sense that that's clearly, if there's force leaking out, that's where it's leaking, perpendicular to movement of electrons. And it's also logically clear that if force was trapped between two things, the closer I bring them together, the higher the frequency, the more apparent energy. That I'm somehow creating energy in the sense that by bringing them together, there's more interactions, and each interaction has exactly the same energy effect. So as I bring them closer together, I'm doing work, and that is going to be revealed in the fact that I now have trapped more energy. So it's kind of like taking two charged plates and pushing them together. You'll have to do work when they're oppositely charged, when they're the same charge. Yeah, and that will be revealed in increasing the potential energy. It's pulling the plates apart. I'm sorry. When you push them together, you lower the voltage. When you pull them apart, you increase the voltage. So you do work to pull two charged plates, two oppositely charged plates. To pull them apart, you do work, and the work is the byproduct of the fact that you've now created a higher voltage. Right. Okay. A higher pressure on the plate, not between them. Right. Okay. I think I said that right. It gets complicated in the sense that we were talking about what the big thing is doing versus what the forces are doing on the big thing. Okay. So that's where this gets a little bit difficult, but you have to keep, it's like keeping it straight, you know, force versus matter and the material bits. So the other thing that this mindless guy keeps ignoring, that I've stated over and over, is that electrons don't have a material velocity. They don't, they can't acquire velocity in a permanent manner. They have to be hit by force to keep moving. As soon as the force stops, the electron stops. Okay, so it's just like the current in a wire. Once you stop hitting the electrons with force, they stop. Totally disinterested in maintaining anything called velocity. They don't just keep shooting out the wire. And so even though matter is able to acquire velocity, it acquires it by capturing force that keeps pushing the electrons inside of the matter to maintain velocity. So yes, the stuff, matter is able to hold a velocity, but that doesn't mean because the material bits inside the matter hold velocity. It's because matter can hold force in a circular pattern, and that force is what keeps the thing moving. So as I've said, even though I say that yes, matter can acquire velocity, and I call electrons and protons matter bits, they're matter bits. The bits can't do the velocity thing on their own. They can only do the velocity thing as a collection. The atom has to turn for the thing to have velocity, kind of idea. Alright, I've already posted this previously. So he links to, like I said, one of these grandiose scientific articles from Science, and it says direct measurement of light waves. That's not what it's doing. So again, it's you know, yes, just keep telling me I have to debunk every piece of shit published in some stupid science journal that isn't rigorous in terms of how they analyzed the science or the claims being made. And that's just bullshit. And it's also, the link isn't of much value in the sense that you can't read the whole article on the link. But anyway, so anyway, his response was here, link 4 below. Well, I'll give you another response now, which is crap. Anyway, the problem though is that the explanation, a stationary electron would be jolted left or right randomly, which was shown not to be the case. So again, he's arguing that he can see electrons, and he can tell whether an electron moves one Planck constant, that is one quanta of distance, which is this tiny amount of distance. It's the distance, it's the smallest distance a photon can travel in the smallest amount of time. And he can see if an electron do that. So if an electron is moving back and forth, those tiny, tiny distances, one quanta at a time, he can see that. No, you can't, mindless. So anyway, it is the light phase that determines whether the electron goes right or left. So, well, says you. I think it's just, I say bullshit to the fact that you think you can see photons, and you think you can see electrons, and you think you can authoritatively say blah, 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 blah. I'm saying I can explain a model of how electrons move, and you can't disprove it with any evidence. Just as I can't disprove your Huygens thing, besides saying there are simpler, more reasonable theories that don't involve magical waves that all of a sudden stop being waves at a certain distance. So again, explain to me why Huygens starts to fail. Why all of a sudden it can't deal with a slit that's a certain width, and it doesn't keep making a wider pattern. The pattern gets narrower and narrower. Anyway, in that video he even mentions that if I say 10 arrows are to the left and 8 arrows are to the left, I think he meant right, then the ton would more likely hit the left moving arrow and give a perpendicular jolt to the electron to the right. And what I've sort of tried to explain is everything's in equilibrium in some ideal state. There's as much stuff hitting from one way as there's hitting from the other. Now if you put another thing into the environment, you break the equilibrium, and now there's imbalances, and those imbalances drive things into each other and drive things apart. And so if something's tending to be pushed by a force, so it's moving, an electron's moving in a direction, it will on its very own move in a jagged direction, merely because of those perpendicular releases I was talking about before. Because every time it releases something perpendicular, it creates an imbalance in its own compass, so to speak, and it will move this way rather than in a straight line. But it's all randomized, so as much as it goes this way, it will also go that way. So it ends up going a straight line if you ignore the random variations. Okay. So the scheme, but obviously if you hit with 7 things on one side and 10 things on the other side, they break the random. And now you will go more this way than you went that way, obviously. But that's not the case. Okay, so he says emphatically, this was shown, he says it was shown somewhere, to depend on light phase. So he says they have this videotape of the photons, and their science isn't based on any bold assumptions or presumptions, and it's not based on their own theoretical model of how things work. No, there was nothing shown. The evidence doesn't say it's true. Their theory says it's true. And that's all. Their Huygens, their contrivance, their interpretation of a bunch of effects. And they're going to say these effects prove the cause. And there's no evidence of a direct connection. So just bold assertions. Like I said, just like people asserting that you can move faster than the speed of light, because stuff actually, light moves slower. Technically, it takes it longer to get through transparent mediums because it doesn't travel a straight line, ironically. Um, they assume that there must be faster than light communication because, gee, there you can go fast. You can make it go faster, faster than its slowness. See, again, so they assume you can do something faster than light because you did something faster than light in a medium, which isn't the same thing. Anyway. It was shown to depend on light phase, where all electrons moved one way or the other in unison. So again, he's talking about a collection of electrons now, and he's going to tell me that they've demonstrated something, and they haven't, as you expect with an oscillating electric field. Well, again, and as I would argue, is perfectly consistent with my theory that every electron is tied to every single other electron in the universe. They're all tied to each other. You can't move one without, in a sense, eventually moving them all, in terms of how long it takes a vibration to get to it, or a change in the universe to get to it. I don't want to say that as an explicit truth. That obviously the whole point of this pattern creation is that you can trap motion in circles, so it never reaches anywhere else. But the fact that it's trapped, the fact that there's not an effect is an effect. Just like the whole might as well be a particle, because in the sense it's made enough change in the force, it's just as dramatic in its effect. The absence of a particle in a position is just as dramatic as the addition of another particle in a new position, in terms of how it changes the force dynamic. So to say it that way is safer. So anyway, he just asserts and cites, like I said, completely superficially analyzed papers, and tells me I have to believe that's the truth. No, I don't. The assumptions built in to those papers. And as I've pointed out, you can't even trust the assumptions built into the papers on the simplest experiment with the lowest amount of technological apparatus. You know what? I've already had enough of this crap. Yeah, well, like I said, I've had my fill of your bullshit. So it's not even worth going, whatever that means. His reply about what I said about nothing and saying, why don't I just say there's a medium or ether, completely misses the point, and he even contradicts himself outright. No, it doesn't miss the point at all. Bent space is a medium. And again, if you're going to create fields, you have to create them out of something, okay? I claim the field is just one field in its quanta, force, moving at the speed of light. There's no other field. You claim there's some field controlling the quanta. These are important differences in our understanding. It's going to prevent the word nothing. He's going to pervert the word nothing so nothing can possibly take up space or volume. Yeah, it's nothing, but it takes up volume. You don't even try to be nuanced. That's your claim. Again, I'm mocking your claim. I don't understand. You can't, I mean, you're so fucking stupid, you can't see how that doesn't make sense. Empty space has volume. And so that's another thing I wanted to talk about, was mass and acceleration. See, there's so many subjects. All right, when they say the word mass, so I've been listening to a lot of these Stanford lectures. And they keep talking about mass and when to have mass in their little quantum, when electrons have mass and electrons without mass and blah, blah, blah. And mass just has to do with this stupid gravity idea, because they don't understand that charge is what creates mass for an electron. Charge is its mass, and that's the force that's affecting it. And so you have to change the name of the function when it gets on the nuclear level, because it isn't red and black anymore. It's just black and red, in the sense that the electrons are strictly obeying just the polarization rules, and they're not doing it in this mixed. It's like the difference between the inverse square, the 4 times the weakening, and the halving. and they're in the having world, and it's a different world, but it's the same exact force. It's the same ping pong balls. It's just that they follow subtly different rules when you're talking about an Earth and you're talking about, made of atoms, and you're talking about the things that make atoms. That's a better way to say that. But it's the same force. So you can't say something has a charge and say then it has no mass. In my opinion, that's silly, because charge is evidence of an ability to manipulate force, and manipulating force is what makes you have mass. The fact that that force reflects off you, you automatically have mass. You don't have mass. Well, quanta is mass. So again, I would argue that this argument of what has energy potential is what the word mass should mean, and that potential is quantizable in the sense that the force elements, the quanta, have one mass. And then you could recognize that a photon would have a mass of 2, because you have to have 2 of them to have the frequency between them. Alright, anyway, been over that, sort of. Alright, so then this is about the 2-slit math. So I say, with math that's consistent, because clearly 2 circumstances are different. One has a single impediment in the math. How is any of this relevant? He's literally demonstrating a lack of knowledge here. So he's claiming that it doesn't mean anything that the double slit experiment is 2 slits, and that you will get a pattern even if you eliminate these 2. So if you just take these 2 away and you just have the single impediment, you'll create a double slit pattern. Now it'll be a different double slit pattern in the sense that I don't think you'll have the 2 patterns inside of each other. So it's essentially the single slit. It's just that you've changed where the location of the surfaces are. So again, as I've always talked about from the very beginning, the whole thing should have never been called a single slit versus a double slit. They always should have just counted the surfaces. How many surfaces are in the experiment is dictating what the experiment's producing. So the double slit, just ignoring, making this width infinite, okay, the width of the slits, still produces single slit pattern, because it still has 2 surfaces. And that's important, but way over this asshole's head. Don't confound this with his second point, which is that online lectures do abandon Huygens' principle when they switch to double slit. So it's not just like online lectures. The most highly paid physics instructors in the country or in the world, unanimously, all of them, every single one of them, inaccurately describes the experiment. So why don't you describe the flaw here a little more aggressively than just saying they abandon Huygens. They contradict Huygens, and they grotesquely oversimplify the experiment and deny the complications, as I just pointed out, that exist. That your math becomes a little bit silly when you can take away 2 of the variables entirely and you still have something. Alright, anyway. His first point is directly false. The first point being the math that's consistent, because we clearly have 2 different circumstances. So the fact that this circumstance has to be accounted for. You can't have just one formula that does this, and then does this. That's not going to happen. Anyway, his first point is directly false. Well, no, I think that's bullshit. And I'd be interested if anyone could dispute this. I'd be interested if anybody could confirm your accusation. at 10:25 he switches to his second point, which is completely separate, well, says you, from saying I didn't show anything about the lectures. Anyway, you're saying you know the right way to do it, so why aren't they doing it the right way? That's what I said. So I asked him the question. You're going to defend this bullshit physics where they can't describe the simplest experiment in physics, just about. I mean, you can't get too much simpler, and they can't describe it accurately, and it's supposed to be nail in the coffin fucking proof, just like the Eddington lensing experiment and the stupid felonious, you know, Hubble telescope lensing images that aren't of our sun lensing, but are of galaxies where the lens is light years across, and they have to invent dark matter to make it make any rational sense. Defend that. Don't sit there and whitewash over it. I mean, damn. All right, anyway. So I didn't switch to some second point. That's always been the whole point of this argument, is that you're defending, look, this is layers and layers and layers of complexity. And obviously, if you can't trust the assumptions, all right, then yes, you kind of have to do a reboot. Then you can't just build in assumptions that electrons have spin, and electrons do this, and the standard model is correct, and there are this, and there are that, and there are neutrinos, and they're not holes in something. Or some kind of, you know, you have to go back and start over with a model. And I'm just saying, if they're willing to do that, the material model, the model that's actually physical, will work. They should have gone there in the first place, is the whole point. If they would have gotten that right in the beginning, then they wouldn't be spending so much time convoluting fake explanations like, yes, two solar masses were converted into bent space. Empty space with force. That's not a particle. Fuck. You're saying you know the right way to do it, so why aren't you doing it the right way? As this has been explained over and over. How has it been explained? This is done to simplify the presentation. It's a physics lecture for students that have at least 2 years of math. So this is their third year of doing physics, and this is the bogus explanation you get. Is that, though they're just simplifying it for presentation purposes. It doesn't have to have anything to do with the reality. That's how you want to teach physics, is with a bunch of false analogies and metaphors instead of anything connected to the reality. When you're describing an actual experiment, right? I mean, this isn't about explaining the concept. I don't mind if they use like Pac-Man or something to explain a concept. But when you're talking about the actual experiment and then you start talking about how, well, and this is where the Pac-Man's, you know, blah, 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 blah. You know, that's bullshit. I agree that this is misleading. It's not misleading. It's fucking catastrophically filled with error code. I mean, it's a toxic virus. This isn't good programming. It's a virus. Considering that it misled an intellectually inept retard. So I'm the intellectually inept retard because I listened to the physics teacher trying to learn physics, and I took him seriously. And then I said, wait a minute. When you look at the actual single slit, it doesn't look anything like what he says it looks like. How come? But I'm the imbecile. I'm the retard. They're not bad for teaching it absolutely wrong. You know, talking about the single slit just being a hump. That's not bad. That's not being an evil, inept retard as a professor. No, I'm the evil fuckhead. So fuck you, mindless. Just so fuck you. You goddamn shameless propagandist. Someone who has a strong distaste for analyzing definitions. Fuck you, that's not true. Anyway, a waste of time for 7 years. Well, this hasn't been 7 years, I don't think, but regardless of how long it's been, we'll see who's wasted their time, you troll. You fucking lousy, stinking, clock-stopping troll in defense of your fucking religion. You're sitting there with your goddamn Christian banner. My guys are right, my guys are right. You know, and then you're linked to complete propaganda articles. We saw a photon and it's vibrating with a frequent direct measurement of light waves. No fucking thing happened and you goddamn know it. You've got to know in your head. You can't directly measure a photon. You have to go through electrons. You can't directly measure a photon. It has to hit an electron. The electron has to react to being hit. There's no subtle photonic reaction. And I think you know that. I think you goddamn know in your scurvy little weasel head that there's no fucking way to subtly detect a photon. You either interact with it or you fucking don't. But that's it. And I think you fucking know that, you fucking cunt. More animated than is necessary, I suppose. Alright, so some asshole's going on about pi. I don't give a shit. And some other asshole, okay, look, he keeps talking about spin. I'm really not interested in photonic spin. I think I explained that to add another force that a photon is carrying would have all kinds of implications that we'd see now. There'd be no point in having anything called any Planck constants, because if the photon is spinning, then that would mean that all of your quantized energy would have to be recalibrated for some kind of analog for a quarter spin or a quarter of a quarter spin or a quarter of a quarter of a quarter spin. Sorry, that's just not going to work, and it doesn't fit the evidence in the sense that the quanta, there's no evidence of quantizable photons, you know, half a photon, quarter photon, so spin isn't going to work, in my opinion, in terms of a photon, as actually being a momentum item, and that you could impart partial spin. So like I said, if you impart complete spin, then okay, go ahead and play with that if you want to, but I don't see any point. It's unnecessary, it's a redundancy. You don't need it because the force of the photon, as pointed out, is in how many times it bounces back and forth. That's how you increase the force of a photon, give it more energy. Potential is to have it, the fact that it can get trapped, and getting trapped means it bounces back and forth and has many, 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 many more reactions. So it creates more energy in the sense that the definition of energy is the conversion of momentum. Alright, so yeah, I'm not going to bother with that. I won't bother reading at all. I just don't see that. You know, my job to defend my theory and my job to defend and to argue against classic physics. And yes, I know classic physics has some horniness to start spinning photons, but I don't think it can theoretically go anywhere. Alright, so then this Jordan Peterson said, you act as if the Aura is obligated to debate you, or else he's a coward. No. I couldn't have made the argument, so again, I'm just going to delete him, but block him. But you know, I made the argument right in the video, kind of simply. He keeps claiming he's won all these debates. I just want to see one. I want to see him debate somebody, or actually talk to a real physicist. He keeps making up the story where he wins. And he never shows the real contest. So I'm just saying, I don't care whether it's me or anybody else. I'm just pointing out for a factual evidence that I begged and pleaded with him for the opportunity to interrogate his physics. And he wouldn't allow me to do it. Because he's a fucking coward. I mean, God the fuck damn. It's just obvious as that. So and then he says, he's got over 100,000 subs, bro. Well, he didn't have 100,000 when I offered the invitation. That's a fact. And what does that have to do with it? They're photography subs, let's get real. He doesn't have 100,000 physics subs. Because his physics is absolute fucking shit. But anyway, this just sort of indicates what this is, that John Wayne asshole. So apparently he's a believer in the fairy physics. You know. So bad. That's where all this energy comes from. Like I said, these people aren't even, they like bent space and they like a few of these ideas in relativity, But they really want to turn the whole subject of physics into just fairy bullshit. You know, they like that physics is already halfway down the fairy, you know, chute. They just want to shove it all the way down that turd hole. Anyway. Alright, so anyway, so yeah, this guy pointed to this video. I found a very well done video. Yeah, okay, it's well done, but it's not too good. And a handful of well-articulated arguments and disproving Einstein's relativity. Well, I wish that's what it did. So anyway, it's Einstein's relativity is wrong, part 1 through 3. So yeah, it's, you know, very nice Asian guy doing a nice little presentation. But seeing some other guy posted to his own program or something here. And again, it's just this cliche misrepresentation of the actual pattern. You know, the single slit does a lot more than this. And his double slit set doesn't do the two patterns woven into each other thing. So it's not accurate. Alright, and so this other guy did this, yeah, there's this guy here talking about Einstein and saying, you know, I've only watched part of part 1, but he's already wrong. I mean, he thinks when Einstein says light travels at the same speed regardless of frame, that that means that you can move towards something emitting light, and that somehow you're not going to arrive at a location. You're shortening the distance the light has to travel. So if I move towards the light source, obviously I'm shortening the distance the light has to travel. So obviously, if there's two light sources, one behind me and one in front of me, and I'm walking, I'm obviously going to see the light that comes from one bulb sooner than I'll see the light from the other bulb, because I'm changing the amount of distance the light has to travel. And he doesn't think that applies, and he thinks there's apparently something that can move faster than light, which he'll never demonstrate, because the speed of light is the speed of the universe. It's the speed of time. That's a fact. Okay, and so faster than light does in fact mean time travel, and it's just kind of a silly conversation. I mean, in my opinion. So many arguments against it, but just even the evolutionary argument. If evolution, okay, knew it could access time travel, that organisms could have, you know, a DNA advantage by going back into the past and fucking with things, come on. Yeah, it just opens all kinds of just silly doors. And there's no point, especially on his obscure and his argument is not deep at all in terms of revealing any fact that was overlooked. He's just presenting the facts, okay, in a skewed way, facts we already know, and so it's not really an argument stating that